telling you, you missed out.
I'll come out next time, but I'll see you later on tonight.
Just text me.
Bye.
Universal Monsters, Legends Collide. Only at Universal's Halloween Horror Nights.
There it is. John Murdy, welcome. Hello. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
After all the technical difficulties, we're here, and thank you for joining me today. I am so excited for this year. I always wanted to go to Midsummer Scream, but I always watch it, online after it happens. So I never missed your presentation, and this year's was just fantastic. So I'm really excited for you and what Halloween Horror Nights Universal is going to be this year. So
thank you. We're excited to bring it to the public.
I'm a huge history buff. So history and horror comes together this year. Yeah. So tell us about the Scarecrow, the Reaping House.
Yeah. It's set in the 1930s during the Dust Bowl. And it's kind of I call it an ecological horror story because, horror is a genre down through the years. It's always tapped into the existential threats of our times. Example of that would be like back in the 1950s during the Cold War. You had all those movies, and Universal made a lot of them, of like giant atomic mutated insects. And that was all feeding into people's fear of this, new atom bomb and what that meant for society. So today, it's, one of our existential threats of our time that we live in is global warming. So I thought it would be interesting to do a house that's based back in the 1930s and the Dust Bowl, but use it kind of like as a bit of a cautionary tale for our times. So the idea is that, man has not tended the land responsibly, which is what happened in the 30s. And these, huge dust clouds are ruining farms across the American prairie. But the scarecrows, who've been silent this whole time, now they, take action to reclaim the land along with
crows,
which they're in league with, and nature itself.
They come alive. Yeah, it's almost like a horror version of the Grapes of Wrath, right?
That happens to be one of my favorite books. So yeah, absolutely.
And one of my favorite movies. I just keep thinking Henry Fonda is going to be attacked by, scarecrows. So
yeah, I mean, it definitely has that vibe. We do a ton of research. Thankfully, the Library of Congress and the U.S. Archive, there's all those great photographs that were taken of the Dust Bowl during that time. And one of the things I noticed is like they didn't use wallpaper or insulation to keep their homes, warm in the winter. They used old newspapers. So like every detail that's in that house is actually pretty historically accurate, because that's what we do.
And I've seen that Ken Burns, The Dust Bowl. I've seen his documentary. And
so have I. I watched it as research again.
Yeah, and the dirt would come into their house, like a foot or two of dirt just everywhere blowing into the house. So
it's awful. You imagine opening your front door and looking up and seeing like a 400-foot cloud of dust coming at your house. And then after that happened, then the plague of locusts started. So it is like Old Testament wrath.
Yes, biblical proportions. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then we fast forward to an old Hollywood ghost story, Universal Horror Hotel, classic Hollywood setting. Tell me about that house for this year.
Yeah, that was born from, I reinvented the Universal Studio Tour and worked on it. I started at Universal as a tour guide in 1989. So I spent a lot of my career working on the studio tour. I'm, the person who put all the video monitors on it. And during the time that we were doing that project 22 years ago, I was doing all this research with our own archive and looking through old historical photographs of what Universal looked like when we first founded the studio, which was 1915. And I noticed in all these pictures, there was one gentleman always standing next to our founder, who's a guy named Carl Lemley. And he had this all white suit on, and he just looked mysterious. And I kept trying to figure out, well, who is this guy? Who is this guy? And I never did figure it out, but I took all those pictures 22 years ago and I put them in a folder and I just wrote Man in White. And when we started working on this particular house this year, I remembered those pictures from 22 years ago. So I basically created a new horror villain that is inspired by those old photographs of our opening day in 1915. And his name is Maxi Deville. And he's a charlatan, guy with a mysterious past who's always moved, across the country, never stayed in one location long. But he comes to Hollywood in the 1920s and he meets this woman named Lillian Van Horn, who is the heir to a vast oil fortune, which runs up through her mother. So Maxi swoops her off her feet, marries her, and then uses the money to build this massive, palatial hotel underneath the Hollywood land, because that's what it would have said back then. Right. Sign. And shortly after the hotel opens, bad stuff starts to happen, mysterious accidents and suicides. And eventually all fingers point back to Maxi. And what we realize, and this is all told in the pre-show before you ever go in it through videos that we created, but you realize that this guy's a serial killer. And the only reason he built this hotel is so he could murder people, because he's part of this, secret society that worships this pagan deity and does blood rituals in the basement of this hotel. So now flash forward to today, it's been all these years since this hotel was founded. It's passed, hands from owner to owner. And the current owners are like, wow, we should really leverage all this great history about this hotel. So they rebrand it the Universal Horror Hotel, because horror tourism is kind of a big deal right now. You can actually, stay in the Borden house if you want. It's a B&B, where Lizzie Borden murdered her parents. Right. So it's, of course, that's a really bad idea to start leveraging all this history, because it triggers Maxi's ghost and all of the ghosts from the 20s that he murdered in the hotel, and they come back and start killing everybody today.
Something tells me you're never going to check out of that hotel. Yes.
No.
And finally today, of course, it wouldn't be Horror Nights without you designing some of the classic legends. We have Universal Monsters, Legends Collide, Dracula, The Mummy, and Wolfman. First time all three of those are together, because I've seen
isn't that crazy?
Film, but they've never had those together.
Yeah. We made a lot of monster movies in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. And by the time we got around to movies like House of Dracula or House of Frankenstein, they just threw the kitchen sink at it. I mean, if you look at those old movies, the posters, it's like Frankenstein and Dracula and the Hunchback, and there's all these different characters. But for some reason, it was never the Mummy. The Mummy always got left out. Probably had to do with the amount of time that it took to do the makeup for that character. Because by the late 40s, when they were making these kind of compilation best of, movies, they probably didn't have the time to do all of that makeup. So this is the first time that we've brought all three of these characters together, and it's in an original story that we created, much like what we did last year with The Bride of Frankenstein Lives. That was an original story that gave a sequel to a film that never had a sequel.
Love that.
And we took the same approach. We wanted to take our monster brand and our Universal Monsters legacy and continue it on at Horror Nights, but do it with an original story that brings three characters that have never been together back together again.
And Slash is back to do the music for the house?
Yeah, he literally just texted me while we're sitting here asking me, how's it going? I had him out here, a couple weeks ago. He's on tour with Guns N' Roses right now. But I had him come down, and we just walked the house during the daytime so he could see everything. But he's created a whole new score, and it's amazing. It's
always incredible, yeah. And I think the reason they didn't put the Mummy into those, because the one comedian said, because the Mummy's not that exciting. He's got a great backstory, he's got a great history, but one comedian said, if you ever get caught by the Mummy, you deserve to die. Because the Mummy just kind of was.
Yeah, and the films and the old, the original film in 32, and then all the sequels. Yes, he's very slow moving.
It's more about mood. It's mood with the Mummy, and kind of suspense more than like graphic. Like the Wolfman will tear you apart, or Frankenstein will go crazy. But the Mummy's more just kind of like suspense and just like more imagination. I thought.
Yeah, it's fun to take all of those characters and find a reason to bring them together. And actually, what I found is it actually exists in our own movies. If you go back and watch Dracula 1931 with Bela Lugosi, because our house is set in London. Is set on the London docks, this big shipping receiving warehouse back in the days when London was kind of like Amazon. Every good in the world traveled through those ports. So I noticed in Dracula, as soon as they have the scenes in Transylvania where Renfield comes out and they do that real estate transaction, they get on a ship and they come to London. And then in The Mummy in 1932, one of the first shots in the movie, it's showing the archaeological expedition, and it goes by the base camp and it says British Museum, which of course the British Museum back then would have, anything that they took from the archaeological expeditions in the early days, that all got boxed up and sent back to London. So at the same time, Dracula's coffin has arrived. On the same day, the mummy sarcophagus has arrived. And even Larry Talbot, who's the character that played the Wolfman, or the character who is the Wolfman, he's from the UK. His ancestral home is in Wales. So he's searching for an end to this curse, and it brings him to London, and all three are in the same place at the same time, and it's game on.
Well, in our final moments here, John, I just love the detail you put into all these stories. Because, think about it. Most people going through these houses in 5 minutes, the backstory, the detail you put into that, I think it all is represented on what you design. But it's amazing that you're conveying all these incredible details that go into these houses. And I guess there's 13 Easter eggs in the Legends Collide. Yeah. But I just beg you, next year you do one of these houses that's a tribute to the Universal monsters, you got to do my favorite film, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Okay. So you need to have Bud Abbott and Lou Costello somewhere, or just something
years ago, about 10 years ago, I was working with Alice Cooper, and I had a very long conversation with Alice about that particular movie. So it's one of his favorite movies.
Oh, mine too. And it was one of Universal's biggest hits of all time, especially.
It was a big hit.
So anyway, you got to get Abbott and Costello in there one year, okay? Just somewhere,
So you can get, hey, Abbott!
Or just like, that's his bunk, or just something, McDougal's House of Horrors. You got to have that somewhere someday. I think that'd be great. John, congratulations, man. I'll see you on the red carpet next week. And I'm excited to see all these houses, and you're just a genius, and it wouldn't be Halloween without you.
Oh, thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you. We look forward to scaring everybody out there this season at Halloween Horror Nights.
Oh, great. Thanks so much, John. Take care. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.